Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Sunday's first session of LitFestx. We are joined with Anjali Joseph, who is streaming to us directly from Guwahati in India's northeast. Um, Anjali has authored three books. Her first novel, called Saraswati Park, won the Betty Task Prize, the Desmond Elliott Prize, and also the Vodafone Crossword Book Award for fiction. Her second book was Another Country, which was longlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize. And very recently, she released her third novel called The Living, which has had great reviews this year. Anjali, welcome to LitFestx.
Thanks so much.
So, Anjali, as today's session is titled "Private Life, Public Life." You've been writing, you know, quite a bit of sex in this book of yours as well. So tell us a little bit about
Uh-huh.
how comfortable are you doing that, and give us the angle around it.
Okay. Um, I think that it's just a very big part of life. It's something that we all spend a certain amount of time doing and a lot of time thinking about, right? It's something that is a very fundamental drive, and that in life, in art, in all kinds of things, it's incredibly important. Whether that importance means that it's addressed directly or more indirectly. So for me to write about it, it's as important as sometimes writing about a character taking a bath or brushing her teeth or sleeping, or these are all really fundamental, important human experiences, I think. And there is some way in which I feel that on occasion, when it's a woman writing about sex, there's a certain type of people maybe feel that it's acceptable to display a certain type of interest that I don't think a male author gets in the same way. But I don't really have, and one feels self-conscious about it also, because it's an experience that's so important, and yet it's something that we don't necessarily discuss in detail or openly with our friends and family, and that's not a bad thing. But so maybe as a writer, there's more fear that, will I get it right? Will I write about it well? I guess.
But that's interesting because usually in fiction, when you're writing about sex, people use it as a tool, consciously.
Okay.
But from what you mentioned,
Uh-huh.
you're doing it as part of the daily routine, or as part of your, part of the characters' lives, right?
Yeah, I think it's such an important part of life, right?
Certainly. But what is the kind of feedback then you get, from your readers? Have you found that readers are focusing on that part more or less, or are 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 people shunning away parts of it?
I don't know. I think on the whole it's fine, and I think people read it in the way in which I've written it. I've had when I there's quite a bit of sex in Another Country also, and then in The Living, and I've had some women readers say to me that they really liked the way that I wrote about sex for this character, this woman character Claire. So there are two narrators in The Living. One is a man in his late 60s who was a Kolhapuri chappal maker in Kolhapur, and one is a woman in England in her mid 30s. And sex is an important part of both of their stories. But so some of the women were saying that they liked the way for this woman, and that it felt sort of authentic, that sometimes she wasn't necessarily in the moment, sometimes she was thinking things while stuff was happening. And also the kind of partly the emotional content, but sometimes the absolute lack of emotional content in it. Again, maybe there's an expectation that for women, sex is, and so often it is, a very emotional experience. But maybe sometimes it's not. Maybe sometimes it's just like, you know, eating lunch. It's nice, but but once it's done, it's over.
I like what you said. It's like eating lunch. Wow. But you
I
mentioned
mean,
about
lunch can be great, right? If you're hungry.
yeah. I think the key word there is if you're hungry. Well, all food is
Yeah,
great if you're
exactly.
hungry, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the Kolhapuri chappal maker, and you've always
Hmm.
chosen very interesting characters. So even in the Saraswati Park, you had these shoemakers, and then you've got this letter writer. So how are you choosing these characters? Is it a deliberate attempt to look at a certain type of characters who are not in sort of mainstream talked about professions, or how do you go about this?
I guess I'm really interested in the idea of craft and people who are really interested in their work. So I guess that's why those people appealed to me. But it wasn't a sort of top-down choice. It wasn't like a kind of reason thing. It's more that I get a kind of image when I'm starting a book, something or somebody in a place, and how this happened and who this person is. So that's kind of how it worked with the chapel maker or the letter writer. Um, but I also think it's nice because for me, writing fiction, the really interesting thing is to have that sense of a lived life. So it could be some kind of slightly unexpected thing that you don't think about, like a guy writing letters outside the GPO, which is still there in Bombay and probably many Indian cities, or a person making these chappals or whatever. So, but that's like if you really look in detail and minutely, then there's a lot that anyone can relate to in that person's life and their experience. It's not that because the man is 68 and he lives in Kolhapur and he makes chappals and it sounds like a sort of relatively unusual marginal profession. It's not that someone like me can't relate to the kind of internal experience of someone like that.
But your characters also then tend to have a very wholesome sort of range of angles to them, right? So one would, traditionally one would assume that if you're writing about a chappal maker, you wouldn't end up writing about, extramarital affairs, or, the sex life, etc. But you have done a good sort of milieu of these different angles. So how are you able to find that
Uh-huh.
inspiration? How are you, bringing all of it together?
I guess, yeah, that's a great question. I guess that I feel like there are so many things in a life, right? Like so on the surface and then visible, not exactly on the surface, but to all the people around who know you well. And there are all these things we carry with us, like experiences that we have that are that mark us in some way and that are important and that our minds keep returning to. Sometimes things that we feel bad about, things that we feel ashamed of, or just things that are not really resolved. So I guess that that's kind of what inspires me in a way. And extramarital affairs or whatever for a chappal maker, why not? I mean, he's no less liable to have those
Of
experiences
course,
than somebody else.
of course. And so, are you drawing upon any experiences of your own, or people you've met? I mean, is there any so are there any personal streaks in any of your stories? I mean, sorry, I don't mean about the extramarital affairs, but in general, any personal streaks in the stories?
Very much. I think some stuff is directly personal. Certain feelings that I have become feelings the character has, and then other things kind of become personal, even if the inspiration is some other thing. So I guess as a writer, you're always listening to the stories that people tell you. And I find that, and I'm sure this is true for many writers and many other people also, that I'm the kind of person who sometimes people that I'm sitting next to on a bus or something just start talking and they'll tell me a lot of stuff. Maybe that happens to anyone who
Sure.
listens. So, and that way in which, you don't know someone so well and in a way they feel inspired to tell you a lot of stuff because it's safe to do so, right? Because it's a kind of transitory friendship. So I guess those things also, that sense that even quite a romantic, even quite a painful, quite a poetic experience could be happening to somebody who on the outside is a really regular looking guy, a father of two and a sort of, working class person and whatever. Like, why not? We all go through these things. It's not necessarily just somebody who uh, looks overtly romantic on the outside who could be having these kind of human experiences.
Yeah, that's very interesting you say that. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by somebody who looks overtly romantic.
I know I was wondering as I said it. I mean, I suppose somebody who's wandering around in floaty white clothes looking a bit tortured or something. I don't even know what that means, but you know,
Well, I know
yeah.
I know a character or two nationally, roaming around in floating around in white clothes, looking a little lost and romantic. I don't know, is that the same that you're talking about?
No, I didn't have anyone specific in mind.
But you're talking about something very interesting because we tend to then also stereotype even literary characters, right? Over the years, in Indian writing or even in Western writing, you tend to assume that a romantic character will be portrayed such, right? Or a serious
Right.
character who's supposedly non-romantic will be portrayed such. But you seem to have broken out of that in choosing, like I said, some unconventional subjects, unconventional characters, but yet giving them this sort of realistic feel. And have
I
you?
don't even know if they're. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, please go on.
So I was saying that when you are doing that, are you also then at a conscious level saying that let me make it more earthy, make it more grounded, or is it just coming to you?
I think it just happens and I get interested in those people. But in one way, I'm not very interested in the kind of obvious hero or heroine, I guess. Like, the kind of sports star, film actor, whatever. Like, I don't find that a story that has a lot of surface texture for me. I'm not that interested. Um, and also, I guess I don't even know about contemporary fiction or contemporary Indian fiction in English so much. Like maybe what you say is true, but I feel like there's such a strong tradition that we have in India in writing in so many languages where people are writing great stories about all kinds of people. Like I've been learning Assamese, which is going very slowly, but with my friend's grandmother who's teaching me very sweetly. I've been reading, and before that with another teacher, I've been reading some classic Assamese short stories, and a lot of them give you this feeling of being on a train, being on a bus, being in a market, seeing someone, and suddenly having this amazing insight into this person's life. So they give you that sense, in a way, of connection to the people around you, not some feeling that literature is some thing that happens in a fantasy way and like, a big bird comes down from the sky and like suddenly your life is transformed. It's more like your life is transformed because actually the people around you become more real and more 3D, and you see that they also have these dreams and fears and everything else. So, or if you think about a short story writer like Manto, who is such a great writer in any language, but happens to be an Urdu writer. So, um, his characters also, there's this sense of incredible depth of feeling and emotion and beauty in the world. And yet, these may be people who are like a dhobi or some teenage boy who's having a sort of, slightly confusing early sexual feeling about his sister or any of these things. If it's not really the external circumstance that makes the beauty of it.
And you mentioned you're learning Assamese now. I wanted to ask you. So you're currently in Assam, but you were born in Bombay. Then you studied and grew up in England, and then you worked in India, and now you're in Assam. How has this affected your work? What's been the type of experiences which you're sort of drawing upon from?
Um, I think it all happens at quite an instinctive level, so I don't really plan things. But I guess that in some ways, all of these experiences are frustrating because it means that I don't have that groundedness that some people have. Like an R.K. Narayan who lived in Mysore and had grown up in Tamil Nadu and knew everyone in the place that he lived or whatever. So that's to me very enviable in some ways. Um, but then in other ways, there is a sort of beauty in a place being more new and kind of learning about it. So I think that also, that gaze brings something very nice. And for me, it's living in Assam now. It's a really lovely experience. It's a sense of discovering things, falling in love with the place, and just kind of finding out more and more. And even in Bombay, which is where I was born, as you said, but then I worked there when I was in my 20s, having grown up mostly in England. and for 3 years I was a newspaper reporter, so I was really kind of all over the city. Um, it was that sense of discovery and sort of rediscovering this place that in some ways is very familiar, but in, I found this whole different layer of it that is partly the Bombay I grew up in, partly not the Bombay I grew up in. So I guess that experience of some things being new, some things being familiar, that kind of tension between those two is always a really nice thing for me.
Interesting. And you're also now doing some amount of teaching in on creative writing.
Yes,
So tell us about that.
totally. So I was doing some creative writing teaching in the University of East Anglia, where I studied for several years, and I did a PhD there and a master's degree and stuff. And I was living in Norwich, which is where UEA is based. But now I do some online creative writing teaching actually, for a kind of, it's run by the university, and also there's a body called Writers Centre Norwich. So I never meet those students for the most part. But we have like an online workshop and they submit work and they read each other's work. And it sounds very strange and disembodied, and it is, but it's actually also very personal and very nice. I think that it's a really nice experience for those people who may be a little bit like this festival. Maybe they just physically can't, they may be working anywhere, they may be doing anything. They can't necessarily physically get to a university class, but they can have this experience of writing and sort of having a group of other writers to interact with, and that's really nice.
Interesting. And you know, I mean, there's so much happening in the literary scene in India now. There's
Hmm.
both on the publishing side in terms of going digital, ebooks, mobile books, and in the kind of writing as well. And there's an entirely new set of writers, authors, sort of emerging from practically every field. What's your take
Right.
on the entire scene?
I think it's great. I mean, I'm not very clued into any of it really. So things just kind of come to me if someone tells me about them, or I happen to find them or whatever. But if more people are reading and writing, or if there's more sort of activity around it or whatever, why not? That's great.
Right. And what next? I mean, I know your recent book is just a few months out, and but are you already working on your next one? What's going on?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm working on another novel. So yeah, I guess that's the kind of main thing now.
Great. And that's going to be out when next year?
No, no, I don't know how long it's going to take. It may take a few years.
Wow. Great. Great. Well, that almost brings us to the end of the session with you, Anjali. But thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you. And I'm sure our viewers who are watching
Thank you so
live
much.
and many more who will watch on YouTube will also enjoy this. Great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Kumar.
Wish you all the best. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.